Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar co-sponsored by Unitarian Universalist for Jewish Awareness and the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, where we'll be discussing the topic of Jewish and with an open ending. My name is Adam Shalom. I am both the Dean for North America of the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism and also the Rabbi of Kol Hadash Humanistic Congregation in North Suburban Chicago. I'll also mention that this program is being recorded, and hopefully, people are watching this in the future and also will enjoy the program as an exploration of this concept of being Jewish and something else, but also more broadly as an introduction to this approach to Jewish life called Humanistic Judaism. And with that, I want to turn it over to Rabbi Jodi Kornfeld, my co-editor on our recently published book, not so recently anymore, almost a year ago, called Contemporary Humanistic Judaism: Beliefs, Values, and Practices, published by the Jewish Publication Society. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jodi, please.
Thank you. So I am Rabbi Jodi Kornfeld. I am the rabbi of Beth Chaverim Humanistic Jewish Community in suburban Chicago, and as Adam just mentioned, the co-editor of this book, which I'm very happy to say has been very well received and well reviewed. You may hear us as we're speaking. We might refer to one another by our first names. That's because we're not just colleagues, but we're friends. And it is not a sign of disrespect if I drop the honorific and don't refer to him as Rabbi Shalom or Rabbi Adam. So I just wanted to sort of clear that up. And likewise, if he refers to me as Jodi, that's completely acceptable. A brief word about the book. Despite the title having three specified subjects, so it's Contemporary Humanistic Judaism, Beliefs, Values, Practices, the book itself is divided into four parts: beliefs and ethics, identity, culture, and Jewish life. So after a general introduction, each part is supported by between 2 and 5 chapters, and each chapter contains several essays related to the topic. We also created a study and discussion guide for the book that's available at no charge on the JPS, Jewish Publication Society website. So with that, by way of very broad background, Humanistic Judaism, by its name, by its very name, is inclusive and additive. It is Jewish and, specifically Jewish and humanist. It does not render judgments, nor does it define Jewish identity as an either-or proposition, or as one phrased as Jewish but. For instance, and maybe you've heard this, I'm Jewish, but I don't keep kosher. I'm Jewish, but I'm not religious. Or I'm Jewish, but I also celebrate Christmas. Those formulations, when it's put with the I am this, but, those formulations lessen a person's experiences and identity. Jewish and, or Judaism and, is empowering of the individual, their values and their lives. It recognizes, if you will, the entirety of a person, all their experiences, all the people that are important to them, all the ways in which they live their lives. As we write in chapter 9, Humanistic Judaism provides a positive ideological basis for unconventional Jewish choices. So when it's framed this way, it allows an individual the ability to experience multiple cultures and make them part of one's Jewish identity. At its core, adjacent to the positive humanism that makes up the first half of the movement's name, Humanistic Judaism centers Jewish culture and heritage as the basis for Jewish identity. And doing so, which has always been a part of Humanistic Judaism, but it appears now the data is starting to catch up with that. It's supported, excuse me, but by the most recent Pew Research Center study of American Jews in 2020. We included a portion of that in the appendix in the book, and the part that we included found that a majority of American Jews view Jewish identity as cultural. 53% of the participants responded that being Jewish is mainly a matter of ancestry, culture, or ancestry and culture, not religion alone, or even in combination with those other choices. Religion, of course, it's a part of Jewish culture, but it is not the only part or the dominant part. And that, you see, would be way too narrow. And so I want to share with you a passage in the book, and it really is one of my favorites that we included. It's written by the late scholar Yehuda Bauer, and we titled it Judaism Is. Bible is Judaism. Talmud is Judaism. Everyday life is Judaism. Jewish history is Judaism. Jewish poetry is Judaism. Jewish customs are Judaism. Jewish food is Judaism. Jewish jokes are Judaism, just as religion is Judaism. But you cannot argue that Judaism equals the religious beliefs of Jews. First, because these beliefs were and are different, even mutually contradictory. And second, because religion was and is just one aspect of Jewish existence. Today, for many Jews, it is not even that. Judaism, then, is everything that the Jewish people in their very long history have produced. Judaism is Jewish civilization. Judaism is Jewish culture. You can see by that that it really fits under this rubric that we're talking about today, Jewish and, because it is so inclusive and so vast. Jewish culture, when we center it, when we move it from the margins and put it right front and center, we see that it is full and rich and diverse. It includes all manner of cultural material that has been produced by Jews wherever they have lived, in whatever language they spoke, in whatever medium they used, and in whatever ways they interacted with other cultures, either in a broad sense, as a minority within a majority culture, or in a very personal sense, because their families are made up perhaps of people who are Jewish and who are not Jewish, who are Jewish and religious, or Jewish and secular. So in a very personal way, we see that adds to the culture. And there is value to our culture's expansiveness and growth. It is not frozen at one point in time, nor dominated by one perspective. There is no authority that deems the resulting cultural canon closed and immutable. You might seem to be, or you might think it to be a paradoxical canon, because the notion of a canon generally is thought of as a closed body of works, while the Jewish cultural canon continues to expand. It is incumbent on us to add to the canon to reflect the growing and changing makeup of the Jewish people. We can create a cultural canon that reflects not merely those parts of the tradition that are meaningful, but those additional things that come from the reality of being Jewish and. We included in the book an excerpt from Nathan Englander's short story, What We Talk About When We Talk About Anne Frank, from his book of the same title. And there's an exchange between two characters in this. And it may sound familiar to you, whether you have personally experienced this or it just rings true from what you know. So the first character says, there is such a thing as Jewish culture. One can live a culturally rich life. To which the other character responds, not if it's supposed to be a Jewish life. Judaism is a religion, and with religion comes ritual. Culture is nothing. Culture is some construction of the modern world, and because of that, it is not fixed. It is ever changing and a weak way to bind generations. It's like taking two pieces of metal, and instead of making a nice weld, you hold them together with glue. So to Englander's characters, I would answer yes. Yes, indeed. The one who insists that Jewish culture is valid, and the other one who says Jewish culture is just ever changing. Yes, yes, indeed. True on both accounts. Humanistic Judaism celebrates Jewish culture, forming a strong bond between the generations and an interplay with tradition that is not dictated by others and creates deep meaning. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam to discuss issues of identification, self-identification, and definition.
Thank you, Jodi. Always wonderful. I do want to turn back to the structure of the book for just a moment because I think it also covers a topic that we're not going to be talking about today as much, in part because of who our audience is. Part one of the book is focused on beliefs and ethics. In many ways, it's an articulate explanation of what humanism is, an emphasis on human power, human responsibility, human knowledge and ability, and human needs as the basis for defining ethics. And so, to an audience that's familiar with the Unitarian world, humanism is not a foreign concept. We don't have to start from scratch or cover remedial topics like that. What makes our beliefs and ethics somewhat different is that they are done in a Jewish context, with Jewish flavor, with Jewish sources and Jewish debates and discussions. But the core belief system, the core values, are indeed a humanistic approach to life. Part two of the book is about identity, which I'll talk about in a moment. Part three is culture, which Jodi just discussed. And part four of the book talks about Jewish life, its community practice and liturgy, how we apply humanistic Judaism to holiday celebrations and life cycle events, and what we mean when we talk about Jewish education for both children and adults. We'll turn to that Jewish life topic in a little bit. So, as promised, something on Jewish identity. For some people, when they talk about who is Jewish and who is not, it reminds me a little bit of the famous Groucho Marx joke, where Groucho Marx said that at this place the food is terrible and the portions are so small. It's complaining about both sides at the same time. So some in the Jewish world want high barriers to not let anybody in terms of who's accepted as Jewish. But then they also complain that there are too few Jews involved in Jewish life. Well, if there are too few people involved, then open the doors. If you want high barriers, there won't be as many people involved. The key question for how you count Jews, who is included and who is left out, has to do with what being Jewish means to you. I was going to quote the same statistics that Jodi did already, so that saves me some time. But I will point out that only 11% of the respondents to that Pew survey said that being Jewish was religion by itself. There were about 25% who said it was religion, ancestry, and culture altogether. But again, over 50% said ancestry, culture, or ancestry and culture without including religion at all. And this actually helps me respond to one of the registration questions that a person asked as they were signing up for this webinar. They mentioned that they had met a Reform rabbi named Rabbi Angela Bookdahl, who has a new memoir out and is doing a book tour. And they asked her about humanistic Judaism and how it fit into her framework of Reform Judaism, and she didn't really have a direct answer to that. And in my experience of reading her writing and hearing her sermons, her concept of Judaism is primarily religion. It doesn't include a category for someone with genuine, serious, non-supernatural beliefs about the world. So sometimes how you define who is Jewish defines us out. Ironically, Rabbi Bookdahl herself is half Korean and half Jewish ethnically, even though she's been raised Jewish and identified as Jewish her whole life. Nevertheless, her definition of Judaism has excluded someone from the orbit of who is truly a member of this community. So how do humanistic Jews define Judaism? There's a wonderful article in the book by Rabbi Sherwin Wine that the title sort of says it all. It's kinship. But it's not just a biological kinship. As we framed the section of that chapter, we called it Jewish peoplehood as Jewish family. When you're part of a people, think of being part of the American people. You have a feeling of shared ancestry, land where my fathers died, right? My ancestors died in other parts of the world, but it's still the land where my fathers died in that sense of patriotism, or think about the founding fathers, even if they're not really your fathers. Being part of a family includes family memories and family stories. There's even a phrase that many Jews use without even thinking about it too much. They say someone is a member of the tribe. And there are many ways to become part of a tribe, of a family. And family really enables the possibility of being Jewish and. So in our introduction to that reading on kinship, we talk about some of the possibilities for being Jewish and. When Wine wrote the earlier part of his article that we did not include in the book, he noticed that most liberal Jews primarily participate in Western culture, with Jewish culture as an episodic experience. He quipped, American Jews can choose Passover and Hebrew classes, but they can also choose Chinese food, karate, and French lessons. Therefore, he concluded their Jewishness must be something other than an all encompassing identity, which it is. We are Jewish and other identities. Wine defined what is today called Jewish peoplehood as kinship. Jews throughout the world are Jews not because of a claimed biological or spiritual descent from a mythical Abraham, but because they are heirs to a diverse family heritage with many branches. A family can encompass many different cultures and lifestyles. And most families continue to accept their members no matter what their relatives may believe. Families can welcome new members through marriage and adoption, and one person may simultaneously feel part of multiple families on all sides of one's personal family tree. So too with Jewish theological and cultural diversity, joining the Jewish people and the Jewish children of intercultural and interfaith partnerships. Defining Jewish identity as kinship, then, includes Jews regardless of theological beliefs or ritual practices or marriage partners or parentage. So our sense of being Jewish is being part of this people, being part of this family, and that includes stories and traditions and recipes and all the other elements that mean being part of a family. You can be born into it, you can marry into it, and you can join a family later in life. Now, for someone becoming Jewish, because we affirm people's humanistic right to define themselves, just as most progressive people accept someone who calls themselves a woman to be a woman, Humanistic Judaism accepts someone who calls themselves Jewish to be Jewish. It is a self-identification with this people and culture. And so that's why we often, instead of the word conversion, use the term adoption, because they adopt Judaism and we are adopting them to be a full member of our family. In this book, we also included a statement issued by our movement in 1988 that defined who is a Jew in response to some attempts to be more and more exclusive in doing so. And at the conclusion of this statement, we have a very concise definition for us. In response to the destructive definition of a Jew now proclaimed by some Orthodox authorities, and in the name of the historic experience of the Jewish people, we therefore affirm that a Jew is a person of Jewish descent, or any person who declares himself or herself, we would say themselves now, to be a Jew and who identifies with the history, ethical values, culture, civilization, community, and fate of the Jewish people. And so formally for almost 40 years and informally for more than that, our movement has accepted people who are of Jewish descent, which is not their mother or their father's side, it's someone with Jewish heritage, or someone who declares themselves to identify with the Jewish people and their culture and their past and their future. And of course, we accept dual citizenship. We accept dual and multiple kinship because you are connected to all parts of your family and heritage and you don't have to choose. It's sort of like the complexity of someone who calls themselves half Jewish. And for some people, that terminology is meaningful. But other people might ask, which half? The left half, the right half, the inside, they are all of them. Just as I am Jewish, I am white, I am male, I am an alumnus of the schools I attended. These are all parts of who I am, and all of these identities exist at the same time. And that's why our sense of who is Jewish and what Judaism means is really amenable to someone who comes at an approach of Jewish and. And so with that, I want to turn it back to Jodi, who I will spotlight in just a moment, to explore that question more of welcoming and including.
Thank you, Adam. So, among the key values of humanistic Judaism are diversity and inclusion. And circling back to that idea that culture is the foundation of Jewish identity, and as Adam just explained, that Jewish identity is one of self-identification, diversity then is valued because it reflects the full and rich lived experience of Jews. In other words, there's really no playbook for this. There's no rule book. It is instead what Jews experience. It's an experiential identification that leads to the value of diversity. because we see a community, a family, not everything, it's not cookie cutter. Everybody is going to have their own approaches because they all have different experiences, emotional experience, psychological experiences, life, employment, education, you name it, right? So, there is no one single way to be Jewish. There's no uniform set of words or rituals that, quote, all Jews say or do. Indeed, we should be very, very wary when we hear the phrase that all Jews are doing or behaving or reciting or speaking in one way. There's a title of a book called What Jews Believe. And it's not very terribly varied, to be honest, right? Instead, it is thought to be that if you are going to be Jewish, this is what you're going to believe. And we know from our own experience, we know from the data, we know from the longevity of humanistic Judaism, having started in the early 1960s, that it isn't a matter of what Jews believe. We have different ways of believing. We have different ways of recreating rituals. So there are Jews married to Jews and Jews married to people who do not identify as Jewish. There are Jews of color and LGBTQ plus Jews. There are Jews who are also humanists, Jews who are also Unitarian Universalists. There are Jews who are Jewish and Japanese, and so many more iterations. We can go through combinations and permutations and finding something else in your ancestry that then you want to follow up and you discover, oh, I always thought I was just this, but now it's much more expansive. I understand that it's more than that. And when we do that and we see all the different iterations, it's like putting out a giant welcome mat. All are welcome. Our movement, since its inception, has welcomed interfaith and intercultural families. Our clergy have performed thousands of weddings and life cycle events for these families without question, without conditions, and without judgment. One of the things I have to say on sort of a personal aside is it's one of the things that I love best about being a rabbi is the ceremonial work. And when I do a wedding, for instance, that brings together not just two different faith traditions, but two different cultures, I'm over the top, right? Because what it does is it teaches me something new. It teaches me a different set of traditions, and it teaches me how to help navigate a couple that is bringing different cultures together. And their wedding is the first place that they are doing that. And they're showing it to everybody who's there that, oh, I'm Russian Jewish for the groom, but I'm Korean and not Jewish for the bride. And so what does that look like? How do we take those different elements and we put them into a ceremony? And the result is so beautiful and so meaningful because it doesn't require one to the exclusion of the other. The Society for Humanistic Judaism calls this approach radical inclusion. And in its 2021 statement, which we included in the book, it states in part, in two parts, intermarriage between someone who is not Jewish and someone who is Jewish is good, period. And it also states, we believe that diversity is a positive value and a strength, whether racial, gender, financial, or neurodiversity. So this perspective represents arms wide open in welcome. It does not require an individual to jettison those other important parts of their identity. Multiple identities is not a contradiction in terms, but rather a statement of the lived reality of one's life, and more broadly, the lived reality of the Jewish community. When an individual is welcomed for who they are, they need not compartmentalize their life into Jew and other. That's not what we mean when we say Jewish and. It's not a boundary, a division. Instead, they can proudly assert that they are Jewish, and this then leads to creating meaning in rituals and holiday celebrations. And so, with that, I'm going to turn it back to Adam to talk about rituals, holiday celebrations, and apropos of this time of year, Hanukkah and Christmas.
How does humanistic Judaism impact Jewish life? Where does the rubber hit the road? There's a Yiddish phrase called tachlis, like brass tacks. What do we mean? How does this work? We thought of the example of reading a description of the rules of baseball as opposed to watching a baseball game. It's very different. And so we wanted to include in the book some tangible examples of what humanistic Jewish life is like. After all, as Jodi mentioned, we've been doing this since the 1960s. And since it is seasonal, we thought approaching Hanukkah would be a good example of what we do with that. So Hanukkah itself, many people think, is the festival of a miracle of lights, where the oil was only enough to last for one day, but it lasted for 8 days. However, when you investigate history, you find the sources for Hanukkah that are more contemporaneous, that say nothing of a miracle of the lights. The first book of Maccabees, the second book of Maccabees, the historian Josephus, who wrote within 100 years or within 200 years of the events described for the Maccabean rebellion, mention no miracle of lights at all. It isn't until the Talmud, almost 500 years after the Maccabees lived, that this legend first appears. And there's an agenda there too, because the rabbis who wrote the Talmud and created its stories didn't like the Maccabees very much and wanted to de-emphasize the military victory in favor of the miracle. Now, this is a challenge for humanistic Jews because we don't necessarily like either theme for the holiday. You know, we're not particularly militaristic, and certainly the Maccabees did a terrible job after they took power of representing religious freedom. The ACLU, they were not, because they imposed their standard of religious practice on other Jews. They even conquered a people called the Idumeans and forcibly converted, even forcibly circumcised them. So they are not a wonderful beacon of tolerance and freedom as the song Light One Candle would seem to suggest. The second challenge is, of course, the miracle story doesn't conform with our humanistic approach to life. It also was invented many centuries later. It may never have happened. And yet, we have emotional attachments to, if you grew up Jewish, to lighting these candles, to using an heirloom menorah that your grandparents or great-grandparents used. And there's also a positive message that you can share from this heritage. There's a candle in the center of many menorah designs called the shamus. It's related to the word shemesh or sun, which I'll come back to in a moment. And the shamus is the candle you light first, and then you use that candle to light the other candles. Couldn't that be a metaphor for how we can behave in the world? That we can be the shamus that provides light and hope and inspiration to other people. It does not dim our light at all to do so, but it creates more light together by sharing our light with others. We can also think about taking the tradition of gift giving and turning it around. Maybe the skill that our children need to learn is not how to receive gifts, but how to give gifts and how to make wise choices in doing so. One thing that my family has done for years is we use the micro loan site called Kiva, which gives a small loan to someone in the developing world so they can start a business or get a bicycle to deliver things or get an animal that might provide both milk as well as muscle to move things around in their agricultural life. And so we have one night every year that we call Chanukiva, where we make a loan or look at the loans that were returned and reloan the money out to somebody else. And it's a way of improving the world a little bit at a time. And we don't give gifts to each other on that night. We give gifts to other people on that night because the emphasis is learning how to give, not just to receive. And for many people, they celebrate Hanukkah because it's the power of memory. It's the importance of heirlooms and the connection that we have to our past that provides a kind of inspiration and uplift. You know, people sometimes think that humanists are boring or flat or purely rational. They can't be emotional. They can't be spiritual and inspired. but we can. We can feel part of something larger than ourselves by participating in this ritual that's happening across the Jewish world and across time in Jewish life, thinking back to all the generations of our family and other families that were a part of this celebration and lit these candles in this season. So that's the meaning of the holiday from a humanistic perspective. Now we have a second challenge that comes up with Hanukkah, and that is, what do you say when you light the candles? The traditional blessing talks about a God who is male, who is a king, who commands you to do things. And we don't believe in a commander. We don't follow commandments because there are plenty of commandments we don't choose to follow. And we don't believe in a male personality that we need to speak to or who demands praise to fulfill this ritual of lighting lights and feel connected to our heritage. So what humanistic Jews have chosen to do when traditional liturgy or songs or other sources in Jewish life don't reflect our values is, if they do reflect our values, we're happy to sing them. There are songs like Hine Matov, Behold How Wonderful It Is for Family to Be Together. We sing that without complaint. Or maybe you can adapt the text a little bit to make it work for you. One of the songs sung in most of our communities is called Na'aseh Shalom, which is adapted from a traditional text, Oseh Shalom, which praises a God who makes peace in his heights and for all Israel. Well, our version, we sing Na'aseh Shalom, we make peace for ourselves in this world and for all the world, not just for all of the people of Israel. So we've taken the same melody, you can clap at the same point in the song. It has that resonance of the sound of tradition, but the integrity of saying words that we believe. Now, one choice that our movement has not taken is to keep the old words in Hebrew and then have the English say what we really mean, and then call it a translation when it really isn't. You might find that in Reform Judaism and Reconstructionist Judaism, in Jewish renewal. One of the questions we got as somebody was registering for the class was, what's the big difference? And when it comes to ethical action, we often have similar values to those movements. When it comes to the ordinary members, many of them are skeptical of a personal God that intervenes in the world too. Where we differ is liturgically, where we want to be consistently humanistic in saying what we believe and believing what we say, as we mentioned in the book a few times. And that means accepting Jewish culture as having been made by the Jewish people, which means even the blessings that are recited were written by somebody at one point in time. And if they were written by a person, then later generations of people can edit, adapt, modify them as reflects their values. We're not the only Jews doing this, by the way. There are plenty of Jewish feminists, for example, who don't like the you being male and the king being male. And so they say instead, Brucha at Shekhinah, blessed are you, the divine presence, as an alternate formula for blessing. So we are in that school of looking for integrity and changing the liturgy to reflect our values. So when we light Hanukkah candles in my household, we sing Baruch HaOr Ba'olam, blessed is light in the world, Baruch HaOr Ba'adam, blessed is the light within people, and then Baruch HaOr Ba'Chanukah, blessed is the light of Hanukkah. And it works out rhythmically that you can sing it to the traditional candle lighting blessing for Hanukkah. So you get that sense of continuity, but you also have the integrity of saying and singing words that you believe. And of course, there is the traditional text if it's fine. There's the adapted text if it needs adaptation. Option 3 is always write something yourself, create something, make something new. You too can create Jewish culture. And we always feel empowered to be part of that tradition by changing things. After all, change is the Jewish tradition, if you want to pick one. So that's always an option for us as well, to create original text, to create original songs, and to have them meaningful to us. I just saw one making the rounds on social media this week. It's called a hot Hanukkah, and it's comparing the melting of the wax with some kind of sensual relationship building. So you can find it online, and it's one more piece added to Jewish culture, just like Adam Sandler's Hanukkah songs and all the other pieces that have been added in recent generations to expand the canon of Jewish music. And so our final challenge with Hanukkah, after we define the meaning of the holiday, after we've decided how we light and what we say, is it just a coincidence that so many cultures light lights in this season, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, right? After all, there's Diwali in Hinduism, the Shinto Shinto tradition has a fire festival this time of year. The Romans had the rebirth of Sol Invictus, which was the undimmed sun, S-U-N, not S-O-N, although there's a reason why Christians moved Jesus' birth celebration to this time of year too. And of course, you may have noticed some lights going up around you this time of year, because in a predominantly Christian society, which America still is demographically, there's the celebration of Christmas. And Christmas is a festival that has become about light as they adapted to the pagan setting. And it's about warmth, and it's about family, and it's about food. Surprise, some similarities to Hanukkah. Jodi and I had the opportunity to write a short op-ed piece in the Washington Post, which unfortunately appeared right when everybody was canceling their subscriptions because of change in editorial policy at that publication. But the op-ed was focused on the fact that you can find commonalities between Hanukkah and Christmas, and that's okay. After all, on many levels, Hanukkah is, as Rabbi Arthur Wasco put it, a festival of darkness, because you light the lights not only near the winter solstice, although not on the winter solstice, but you light it at the end of the moon cycle. The 25th of Kislev in the Jewish month is always near the end of a moon cycle. So it is the darkest night possible, closest to the longest night there is. So it really is, in many ways, a festival of darkness, but also a lesson. The lesson is that we are the light. We provide light, we create light, we are the light to each other. The flames that we light on the Hanukkah menorah can reflect both the warmth of family and community and the enlightenment of new ideas and insight into the human condition. We get both of those from our family, who teach us and nurture us, and from our community, which makes life possible and joyful. It's not an accident that two of the most observed Jewish holidays are Hanukkah and Passover, because other events are happening seasonally at that time, with the turning of winter and the birth of spring, but also culturally in our surrounding cultures. And to get back to our theme of Jewish and, of course, there are plenty of families that celebrate both Hanukkah and Christmas. Some of them do them in sequence. When Hanukkah appears, that's when they celebrate, and Christmas is the 25th of December. It's an interesting irony. It's the 25th of a month in each calendar, just different calendars. Some people combine their celebrations. So they put a Jewish star on the tree, or dreidels on the tree, or have Christmas food as they're lighting the menorah. There are ways that you can combine those two holidays if that's what your family chooses, or to celebrate them separate but equal. I know that phrase doesn't sound good, but it does work for many families, to feel connected to both of their traditions. And now you can even buy greeting cards at Walgreens that celebrate Christmaka or Hanukkah, if that's what you choose to do. The point is that, again, if you're celebrating family traditions, you can be creative and combine them in meaningful ways. There are families, to follow the example that Jodi mentioned of Jewish and Japanese, who for Passover, when they want to have a bitter herb on the Seder plate, will choose wasabi as their bitter herb. And that's their way of representing both traditions. Or if you have an egg on the Seder plate, maybe it's an Easter egg that's been dyed. And you see, there are a lot of parallels between the traditions, and we're not allergic to accepting them. Because ultimately, and this is the key point, and after this we'll open up to questions and reactions. The key point is religion, culture, identity are made for people and made by people. If they respond to human needs, if they understand and explain the human condition, if they connect people to each other, then they have a positive meaning and a positive impact on our lives. And so you can be Jewish and another cultural or family or ethnic or religious connection that's meaningful to you, because it adds positive meaning and inspiration and value to your life. So if Jewishness is made by people and was made by people and transmitted by people and serves the needs of people, so does every other identity in the world, and that's what they have in common. They start with people. And so with that, let me bring Jodi back here. Spotlight, there we go. And let's see if we have any questions in the chat. I do have a few more questions that were submitted as people registered. I see someone commented with a reference to Kiva. Thank you very much. That's a wonderful organization that does good work. And I mean, honestly, even if you're a libertarian capitalist, it's a good move, because it's a loan for someone to become self-sufficient. It's not even dependency of give out. So It works for helping people to be in charge of their lives, which is part of a wonderful humanistic value. Jodi, I didn't know if you wanted to respond to anything else that we had touched on before we get to some questions.
No, I was just simply going to say, in discussing rituals and creating new rituals, one of the experience that I know I personally have had, and I think I can speak pretty much for almost all of my colleagues, my rabbinic colleagues, is when we do a ceremony, we uniformly are complimented on how meaningful it was because we're focused on the human beings that are involved, the two people who are getting married, the person who has died, where we're celebrating their life. The ceremonies that we do don't um, uh, have an obstacle course. Maybe that's not the right phrase, but an obstacle course of prayers that were kind of like, we got to run around this one, but then stop there and say that, and then do something else. Or maybe it's a relay race, I suppose. But instead, we're focused on the individual. And people who are Jewish, people who are not Jewish, who are attending these things, we receive a lot of compliments that once we focus on individuals and aren't doing things by rote, that it has to be this way, and that we have to use God language, and that we have to be doing this and bringing God in as the third being, if you will, right, to a marriage, and in addition to the couple, whatever it is, suddenly it's revelatory for people who attend these things. And I have heard from people who are not Jewish who are like, I can't believe this is what you do. This is how you do this. I want one of those, whatever those are, right? And so the ability to create ritual, infuse it with meaning, and as Adam just said, to focus on people, that's critical.
Yep, definitely. So if you're participating in the webinar, please feel free to add a question or a comment in the chat. I can't imagine we've answered everything. Um, Robin has just posted a connection to the Hanukkah Shabbat that the UUJA is hosting on December 19th, which is during Hanukkah. So it's a Shabbat during Hanukkah, so it's 2 for 1. And so you can connect and register there with the link. And actually, one of the questions we did get in our registration process was, what is the intersection of Judaism and Unitarian Universalism? And to be honest, I'll say that's the whole point of UUJA. So I would recommend you connect with them and find out how they're exploring that. That's actually not our department. I happen to be in a Unitarian church at the moment because my congregation rents office space from one. But we are a distinct movement in humanistic Judaism. Many of our communities share space with Unitarian churches because we share values and we like that we don't have to cover up the crosses. So it works well. But I will say that there are a lot of commonalities between the two in that there is an openness to multiple cultural identities. There's an exploration of the humanist tradition in philosophy as well. But I will add that the Unitarian approach sometimes is still structured as a church meeting on Sunday mornings and so on, where humanistic Jewish communities may run a Sunday school for convenience timing's sake, but we also have Shabbat services, high holiday services on the dates of those high holiday events. And we're primarily organized as a Jewish community that welcomes people of many backgrounds. And so for some people, that flavor makes a difference. As some people pointed out in registering, if they live in Bismarck, North Dakota, they're going to join where they'll find people closest to their people. And so we fully understand that. I do want to mention one other question that was asked in advance that relates to what I wanted to say next. Someone asked, how can Jews with chronic illness or disability feel connected to Jewish community? And we actually live, believe it or not, in a golden age for people with disabilities and chronic illnesses to have opportunities to connect with Jewish life. And that is that we live in the online world. Someone's asking, do you offer online services at your congregations? Exactly. So my congregation runs regular Shabbat services. They are always available online in some capacity, whether it's Zoom only or a hybrid in-person and online. And we put in the extra time involved to make sure it's two-way interactive so people in the room can hear the people online and vice versa. It's complicated. It takes me an extra half an hour to set up and take down every week, but it's important. We do the same for our holiday celebrations. Now, some other events like a Passover Seder, is too complicated with all the moving and complications there. You can find actually on the Society for Humanistic Judaism's website a listing of their local communities, when you may have one in your area, or a list of communities that offer online programming, and there are a few of them that are still doing it even post-COVID. So the website for the Society for Humanistic Judaism is shj.org. When I get a second to not talk, I'll type something in the chat. But for people who are facing chronic illness and disability, it's wonderful that these opportunities are now available. I feel bad that we didn't take advantage of it before, that we did it out of necessity, but now it's an opportunity to help people stay connected and feel connected, whether it's putting on captions and having that available. Honestly, even our videos, like this video, if you're watching it later in time, can put a caption in any language you want because YouTube enables automatic translation for the words. So it really is opening the doors to people to connect in ways that they haven't for a long time. The link there that was just posted is for the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, which is our educational and training organization. The society is just shj.org. All right.
I,
Jodi, you want to
yeah,
answer and I'll
I
look
was
back
going to
to the
say,
chat?
sure. I was going to say, I noticed that Naomi posted that, or put into the chat that she was often considered, I don't want to use the word accused, I don't have the wording right in front of me, not Jewish enough. And I wanted to address that because there's not a hierarchy. There ought not to be a hierarchy of Judaism and Jews. That, as Adam referenced with Rabbi Wine's article on kinship, it's a big family. There is not or should not be a pecking order. That humanistic Jews are not sort of the bottom of the food chain. We are educated, we are well trained, we are good at what we do when we have been trained. We've been ordained by the International Institute. And so, not living up to somebody else's definition of who's Jewish, what a Jew should do, that, the language that I use sometimes, I know it came, from having done too many Zoom meetings during COVID, of just hit the mute button on that one. If that's what people are saying, no, that's not okay. That's more about them than it is about you. Your Jewish identity, and if that's an important piece of your identity, that's enough. Nobody else can judge that. And it's hurtful. And I hope that any of you, besides Naomi, who have experienced that, understand and can help, can sort of recover or be healed from that, because those are hurtful accusations. It sort of comes a little bit to the idea when kids in particular, like in my Sunday school, if they come from two different faith traditions, well, I'm half Jewish. Well, okay, well, you're in Sunday school now with me, and we're going to talk about things that are Jewish, but you have additional family members. You have additional parts of who you are. I'm not going to ask you to sort of, draw lines on yourself and say this half is and this half isn't. So not Jewish enough. Mm-mm. I that's Naomi. I had to answer your what you put in there because it just hit me in a way that I wanted to sort of let you know that you were heard.
So I also point out the irony that Naomi Levine, to the uneducated ear, sounds very Jewish, right? The name. And if you didn't ask about your parentage, people might not know. But that's the complexity and the ridiculousness of having these ethnic bouncers trying to kick people out. We don't need more people telling people they're not Jewish. So Mary is asking about the difference between humanistic and Reconstructionist Jewish community. And there are a lot of parallels. In fact, in our first collection of essays that we used to define our movement, which was published in 1995, called Judaism in a Secular Age, we included Mordechai Kaplan, the founding thinker of Reconstructing Judaism, in that anthology because his concept of Judaism as an evolving civilization is exactly our concept of the history of Jewish evolution as well. However, Kaplan focused on trying to preserve continuity with Jewish traditional prayers, from our perspective, at the expense of integrity, of saying clearly what you believe. He felt chosenness and the chosen people was too far, but he's still talking to a personal God, you, who's a melech, who's a king. Now, some congregations may adapt that and use the alternative language with feminist words and so on. And the complexity is, do you feel like your values are being represented, or do you have to kind of think around what you're actually saying? Where in a humanistic Jewish community, if you're truly a humanist, you don't have to try to redefine God as something else. Ultimately, from our perspective, and we have an essay about this in our book, we use the language of human beings, and if you are talking about our Father, our King, even if you mean the force for good in the universe, you're saying our Father, our King, our Father, our King, Avinu Makenu, over and over again, and the Hebrew words have meaning. So better to adapt it more, go the next step, perhaps, from where Reconstructionist Judaism started and stopped, and be willing to have a little more courage in seeking that kind of full integrity, full humanist integrity. So honestly, on some level, it's a flavor. We have debates in our movement over, can we use the word holy or not? Does holy mean supernatural, or does holy mean what we deem as special? Can we use the word holy once in a while? But if I say holy this, holy that, holy moly, holy everything, then it begins to sound too religious for people. Are people allowed to wear traditional religious garb, like a talit, a prayer shawl that says, "Blessed are you, God, who commanded me to put this on"? Or is that up to an individual if it's meaningful to them to wear it? And if it's not, then they don't have to wear it. Each community will make their own choices. Each individual will make their own choices. And we included, maybe for the first time in an anthology of Jewish thought, a Facebook discussion because we had a really generative and meaningful exploration of this question of ritual garb in humanistic Judaism that took place in a Facebook discussion group about 5 years ago. And we felt it was a good demonstration of how our movement approaches these questions. That ultimately, if we're humanists, it's up to you to define what's meaningful to you rather than up to us as the rabbis to impose upon you our sense of what's consistent and what isn't. Even between the two of us, I don't personally wear a yarmulke or a talit, and our community generally doesn't include that as part of their bar, bat, or bar mitzvah rituals, where Jodi's community does, if the family chooses to do so. So it really is a matter of individual flexibility and what's meaningful to them. But one of the areas we have in common is seeking this consistently humanistic language, which if I went to a Reconstructionist or a Reformed temple, I wouldn't have that experience, certainly in the Hebrew, but probably also in the English as well.
Right. And let me just add where Adam is talking about, the difference between our congregations. When our congregation at a bar mitzvah is using a talit, it is reinterpreted and it's framed so that there's no misunderstanding that they thought they were walking into a humanistic congregation and instead that's like, oh, this is just like my Reformed congregation. The kids got a talit on. No, what we say is the fringes of the talit tie the generations together. And I would say 99%, if not a full 100%, the talit that they're using is either an heirloom item because it belonged to a grandfather, and because of the ages, it was a grandfather. Or grandparents, when the child was born, made a trip to Israel and specifically bought this, looking ahead 13 years, and they found it at a special store in Jerusalem, and it's been tucked away, and now it's been pulled out. And so in that sense, saying that the fringes tie these generations together, we're reinterpreting a ritual object, but we're not going to do it silently. We're going to let everybody there know what we're doing so that there is no room for misunderstanding or misinterpretation.
And in my community, if people ask for an heirloom to give to the children, I might suggest a set of Shabbat candlesticks or a new Kiddush cup or some ritual item that no matter where they land on the Jewish spectrum, they will have opportunity to use it and have it be a meaningful heirloom. And we might even use those candlesticks at the bar mitzvah ceremony on a Friday night, and then it becomes an heirloom because it was used at that special moment. So I did see the question about Zionism. I am going to come back to that. We are not dodging it. But I do want to touch, since we were talking about connections to other movements, with the question that Greg asked, are there any connections between humanistic Judaism and ethical culture as founded by Felix Adler? Felix Adler, as some of you may know, was actually trained as a Reform rabbi, but read too much Immanuel Kant to stay in the Reform Judaism movement. So he founded the idea of ethical culture where their religion is ethics, is being a good person. And there are many secularists, humanists who have been part of the ethical culture movement because it's atheist friendly. We'll put it that way. So we do certainly have many commonalities with them in terms of philosophy of life, how to be a good person, what makes meaning in a world without cosmic purpose. So we have that humanist identity in common. In fact, one of the first training programs that Rabbi Sherwin Wine, who was one of our founding thinkers, helped to found was something called the Humanist Institute, which was a joint initiative of the Society for Humanistic Judaism, the American Humanist Association, and the American Ethical Union, which is the umbrella organization for ethical culture communities. Also, I'll point out that a lot of the early founders in ethical culture came from Jewish backgrounds. You may have heard the last name Oppenheimer recently. His family was an ethical culture family. He was raised as part of the ethical culture community in New York City, along with a lot of other German background Jews who were historically Jewish, but were looking to, in some ways, move beyond that identity to be part of a universalist culture of ethics. The challenging part is that some Jews have decided to have their humanism but stay as part of an actively cultural Jewish community. That's again where we diverge from the ethical culture choice. Now, one thing that humanistic Judaism does that's important is that we do allow people, if they choose to stop being Jewish. I once gave a talk at an ethical culture community in Chicago, and one of the first comments I got from the audience was, well, I was raised Jewish, but I've stopped being Jewish, and why haven't you? If you're really a humanist, you'll leave behind all that particular identity stuff. And so I said to the person, well, you're welcome to define yourself how you choose. You know, for us, Judaism is not like the Hotel California where you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. Uh, but for us, you can. You're allowed to choose to not be Jewish anymore. You have Jewish heritage, you have Jewish history, but again, you can self identify in, you can self identify out. That's the freedom of a humanistic approach. But we don't require someone to be Jewish their entire life. And if ethical culture people decided to move beyond Jewish identity into a humanist approach that was universalist, that's their choice to do so. We've chosen to maintain a particular Jewish identity while still having that broader perspective of humanist philosophy. Jodi, I don't know if you want to start at the answer to the next question, which we get
Right.
all the time. Are
Right.
humanists necessarily
Necessarily
atheists?
atheists. So no, they're not necessarily atheists. It's nice that there is a place for Jewish atheists, although many times you get sort of this puzzled look when you put those two words together. How can that possibly be? So I think if you're a humanist, you take, and your humanist philosophy of life is human-centered, it doesn't really necessarily leave a lot of room for God because you are filling that space, that spiritual space, that personal need, and all of that with human-centered answers and ways of seeking answers. So it is a place, humanistic Judaism is a place where people can feel comfortable and not excluded or looked down upon if they are Jewish atheists, but sometimes people aren't ready to identify that way. That's sort of a little bit of a bridge too far. That somehow atheist just has a very negative connotation. There was a Gallup poll a number of years ago that showed that more Americans would vote for a Muslim to be president than an atheist. And so, people sometimes shy away from that. So there are people who are agnostic. They're not sure if God exists. There are people who identify with a phrase that Rabbi Wein is, the attribution of this phrase is to Rabbi Wein as agnostic, which is, I don't know if there's a God or not, but it doesn't change how I'm going to live my life. In other words, it almost like ignores the subject. Then there are theists, people who do believe in God, but for their Jewish identity, that's secondary. They are not going to be living their lives in a prayerful, worshipful, waiting for divine intervention kind of way. There are some people who identify as deists, that the idea that there was a God, started this world, and then left to go, create new worlds somewhere else. So it's not necessarily a fully equivalent that if you're a humanist, you're an atheist, but I think that you will find it more frequently that is the case than not.
The other important point to highlight, which we do in the book as well, is that we are not always defined by what we don't believe.
Right.
One of our favorite essays of all time that we were able to include in the book by Sherwin Wine is called Believing is Better Than Non-Believing. And he points out that being a non-believer is defining yourself by somebody else and by what you don't think and what you don't do. It's like that less than Jewish identity that Jodi was talking about earlier. We prefer to define ourselves by what we do believe. Just like think about the pro-life and the pro-choice movements. They choose their labels to be positive and to stand for what they stand for. So we believe in human rights and freedom. We believe in human autonomy and human choice. We believe in human power to improve the world. We believe in human knowledge to understand the world. We don't need a God to intervene in those circumstances. So it's the positive beliefs of humanism that we try to emphasize repeatedly in the book. And when we slipped up, our editor was excellent at catching it and saying, this sounds a little negative, or you're comparing yourself to other people in a negative way. Let's focus on what you do believe and how you do celebrate with these positive values. And I think the book is better for it. I know that our articulation of humanistic Judaism is better for it because it's more uplifting and people want to connect with people who do have beliefs. We do. We are not non-believers. We question some things that other people assume are true, but we have positive beliefs that we share, positive values that we share. So that's why the movement is not called atheistic Judaism or there ain't no God, no way, no how Judaism. It's humanistic Judaism because we share positive beliefs in what people can do and know and what we can do individually and together. Some people sometimes imagine that a humanistic Jewish service is like a CIA redacted document with a lot of blacked out lines here and there. Blessed are you who and doesn't. It's all negative. But instead, what we do is we change the focus. Where the traditional text is looking above and beyond, we look out to each other and we look within ourselves. That's how we refocus things. So Yom Kippur is a day of atonement, and forgiveness is about human forgiveness of each other and perhaps some forgiveness of ourselves for our failings with appropriate, recompense and trying to make good what we did wrong. That's shifting things to the human level. So it's not shaking your fist at the sky when there may or may not be anything listening. It's a positive focus on what people can know and do in the world. In this world that is, as far as we know, it may be the only world we get.
Right. Yeah, and I want to really underscore what Adam said about that particular essay being really one of the all-time favorites. Because I think what it does, it's very empowering when you say what you do believe. You're not defining yourself again in contradistinction to somebody else. And the other thing that it does is it gives room for conversation. Too often, if somebody were to say, I don't believe in God, I call those conversation stoppers. Because where are you going to go? Somebody's either going to try and convince you that you're wrong, that there is a God, or they're going to walk away. But instead, if you say, I believe in the power and authority of human beings over their own lives, now that's a conversation starter because somebody else may respond, even if they believe in God. They may say, well, I believe that too. I believe, if you tell them the things that you do believe in, now you've got common ground. And I think that helps to build community and on a smaller level, a smaller community, but also on an institutional Jewish community. Because too often the only voices that the institutions are hearing are the voices of people who only want things done in a traditional way with a traditional formulation. And so being able to open those conversations, I think, is really valuable.
So I put in the chat a link to the website, the tribute site we made for Sherwin Wine. It's like an archive and collection of essays, audio and video recordings called sherwinwine.com. And there's that text of that essay, "Believing is better than non-believing," is there. I shouldn't say that because you should buy the book. But
Right.
if you want to get a free sample, you can take a look at the essay, "Believing is better than non-believing," at the website. Now, to bridge off of what Jodi was saying about the Jewish community assuming there's only one voice and one approach, let's talk about Zionism in Israel. Because this has been a controversial issue, certainly in recent history, but also for a long time. I mean, there have been non-Zionist Jews going back many centuries, but certainly in the last couple hundred years, whether it's the Orthodox Jews who thought it was chutzpah, it was, too forward to try to create a state without a Messiah, or Jewish Bundists who were part of the Jewish labor movement who wanted to fix things where they were in the language they were speaking in Yiddish rather than go to some other country and try to learn a language they didn't know in Hebrew. And the American Reform Movement, there were strands of it that were very opposed to a Zionist state because they felt it would lead to accusations of dual loyalty. The Jews were only loyal to Israel and not truly loyal citizens of where they resided. And those were people who felt Judaism was purely a religious identity, and so they could be Americans of the Mosaic faith, and their nationality would be Jewish and Judaism and not a national or ethnic identity. So there have been non-Zionist Jews in the past. There are non-Zionist Jews today. There are non-Zionist Jews in our humanistic Jewish communities. At the same time, there are Jews who are involved in humanistic Judaism who do see a value in some kind of a Jewish state. Now, generally, they would like a state that follows human rights, that enables everybody to marry whoever they want, that treats its citizens equally and with dignity, that handles other peoples that they relate to with dignity and respect. I mean, frankly, I'd like an America that does that too, if we can be honest. So there is a possibility of having some kind of a Jewish state that could be consistent with a humanistic set of ethics. Unfortunately, there are also people who, out there in the Jewish world more broadly, who advocate for and in Israel are working for a state of Jewish supremacy, of oppressing Palestinians in the West Bank, of indifference to civilian casualties in Gaza. I shed no tears for Hamas, but for children and for civilians, I have human empathy. And so this is the dilemma that Israelis face, that American Jews face, and that humanistic Jewish communities face. We do talk about this in the book. In particular, we've included an essay by one of our rabbis on how to talk about Israel in a humanistic Jewish community, because we can be of many minds, but still find common ground to talk. And I'll say that after the terrible tragedies of October 7th, and then the continuing tragedies of what happened to follow, I've held a number of programs in my community talking about this issue, and I've always been not surprised, but pleased and uplifted that we can have people who have very different perspectives, who nevertheless can discuss things together, can accept that other people come to different conclusions, and then can share an Oneg Shabbat cookie and drink afterwards, and still feel connected as one community. It's a very challenging balance, and some communities insist it has to be all one way or all the other, and otherwise you're a bad Jew if you're either not showing compassion enough or not defending Israel enough. We've tried to steer that middle ground of allowing people to make up their own minds, but also articulating where Israel falls short, where human rights are valuable, and also sometimes where Israel critics may go too far. And certainly people like Nick Fuentes and other people who are condemning Israel are doing so from anti-Semitic perspectives. Criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitic. Plenty of Jews do it. But some of the people who criticize Israel are anti-Semitic. And so finding a way to parse that difference is a real challenge. The same is true with what kind of Zionism are you talking about and what the best solution forward is. There's no one true answer. Part of our challenge as humanists is to accept that we have partial knowledge and partial goodness and partial evil as part of who we are, and to do our best to work together to emphasize the good and, as I said, to light that candle that lights other candles. I don't know, Jodi, if you want to add anything to any of that.
No, I think that the article that Adam referenced that is in the book about how to have constructive conversations. I think that it's such a hot political issue right now, because of the war, that it makes anything you say that is less than 100% supportive of Israel makes it out that you are a bad Jew, that you are outside the realm of the Jewish community. Um, and that's not true. This idea, when my ears perked up when Adam's like that, you're a bad Jew. It was that same thing of that, well, you're less than. You're not really Jewish. Because if you're Jewish, all Jews support Israel unequivocally. And the minute you start to question that, um, accusations follow. And that again, that's not a fair equation, not at all. But there are many different opinions, and humanistic Judaism and humanistic Jews are no different than other denominations. It is not that, oh, well, humanistic Jews, of course, they're going to behave this way because they are the most liberal or because they are the most liberal on the religious spectrum, not on the political spectrum, though they often go hand in hand. That there's an expectation then that you would be thinking certain ways. But we have this not just among our communities, but we have this among our colleagues. There's not unanimity on uh, how people think and how the subject is approached. It's fraught. It's definitely fraught.
I'll also mention that our movement has had positive connections with the
Mhm.
left wing and of secular identity in Israel since the 1980s, because there's a long tradition of secular people think of Israelis like if you do a Google search for Israeli Jew image, you get an ultra-Orthodox Jew, which represents like 15% of the population at the most. And a large part of the population self-identifies as secular. Thinking of the kibbutz movement, the urbanites in Tel Aviv, the high-tech sector, there are plenty of Jews in Israel who are Jewish and secular. And so we've had a positive connection with those people and their movements and their organizations and leaders for many decades. There's an institution in Israel started in 2003 that ordains secular humanistic rabbis in the Israeli context. And many of those humanistic rabbis there are leaders in rabbis for human rights and advocacy for against the judicial reform proposals that were the rage before October 7th. And they're really doing wonderful work there for our shared values. And so we support their work and they support us as it works out as a collaborative global approach to Jewish life. And we get very positive benefits from that ongoing dialogue and connection. They are our family too. It'd be hard to be part of a global Jewish family if you write off 40% of the people that are part of that peoplehood and say, I refuse to relate to them in any way. So this is our approach that they are all part of the family, and some parts of the family we get along with a lot better than other parts of the family, but they are all part of our family. All right. So we've got about 10 minutes left on the clock, at least, for any last comments or questions, if you have them. As I said, I will be sending out a follow-up email with some links to other sources. And any of those who did ask for any further information on humanistic Judaism, I'll be sending you a separate email with suggestions of podcasts and reading resources and other opportunities to follow up on your connection. I'll also point out that the book is still available. It's called Contemporary Humanistic Judaism, Beliefs, Values, and Practices. You can buy it actually on Amazon if you choose to, or you can get it directly from the publisher, jps.org. You can just search by the title or by either of our names. And they have on the site a 40% discount for a paperback print copy. They have a coupon code right there. If you have a discussion group that's interested in having a more extended study process through the book, if you buy 10 or more copies, it's a 50% discount with a separate coupon code. And on the excerpt and resources page, you can see the table of contents. You can see links to video interviews that we've done or text interviews. And our discussion guide that Jodi mentioned at the beginning, which has a lot of interesting questions, opportunities to reflect more on the content of the book. It was a labor of love, and as Winston Churchill said, a book begins as a quest, and then it becomes a task, and then it becomes a burden, and then you feel like you're a slave, and then just when you're about to reconcile yourself to your perpetual servitude, you slay the monster and fling it before the public. So it's been flung before the public for just about 12 months now, and we've been gratified by the response, and hopefully you found some of the ideas that we've been discussing and exploring meaningful and uplifting. And if you're interested in exploring them, we encourage you to read the book, as they say, and find other people that might be worth connecting with.